Thank you, Brink. Let me say at the outset, I'd like to thank the Cato Institute for hosting this event. I had the good fortune several years ago, a long time ago when I was a television producer, of interviewing Milton Friedman a couple of times at his home in San Francisco. And I remember him saying very clearly and explicitly during the course of one of our interviews that freedom is my highest value. And freedom is, I don't know if it's my highest value, but it's certainly up there in the top tier. And the Cato Institute has done more to defend freedom in this town where it needs defending than just about anybody else. And we're very grateful for your work. It's needed now as much as ever. I also want, it's an honor to be here with Brink because I'm going to do my publisher no favors by breaking the first rule of promoting a book, which is immediately talk about somebody else's book. But Brink has written, there are a lot of young people in the room who may not be familiar with it. Brink has written what, in my view, is one of the 25 or so best books of the last quarter century, a book called Against the Dead Hand. And if you've never read it or don't know it, please go get it. It's had a profound influence on me, how I look at the world, how I look at geopolitics and economics, and so it's a real honor to be with you. Brink mentioned that the original discussant couldn't be here, but we do have Tim Kaine, which is terrific. Tim is at the Kauffman Foundation. He'll probably tell you a little bit more about them, but one of the things I found in doing the research for this book, a big theme of the book is entrepreneurship and entrepreneur-led growth. And there had been, until recently, very little solid economic research that had been done on entrepreneurship. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, which Tim might be able to get into, but the research that has been done, a lot of it has been done thanks to support from the Kauffman Foundation, and whether you realize it or not, we're very much in debt to that, to our enriched understanding of entrepreneurship and entrepreneur-led growth, thanks to Tim and his team's work at Kauffman. So it's great to have Tim here. I want to talk about three things today. The first is my interest in this subject, which is a personal nature, which I'll talk about in a second. Second thing is who might be interested in this book, and then the third is just a big takeaway that I'm hoping to leave you with today. My interest in this topic of long-run dynamic economic growth actually starts with some of my family history. I come from, as the name Shulz suggests, I come from good German stock, German Lutheran immigrants who came to the United States in the 19th century, and they were cabinet makers. They were basically carpenters. They were engaged in a profession that is not the oldest profession. I don't think any of my ancestors were doing that, but one of the oldest professions in recorded history. And they came to the United States, settled in Chicago, and they were cabinet makers. And when they were there, they entered in the 19th century the then burgeoning piano-making business, the M. Shulz and Company piano-making company of Chicago. They were entrepreneurs. I won't go into the details of the history of the piano industry, but it's actually a pretty fascinating industrial history. They had some success with that. They competed vigorously with companies like Steinway of New York. And they ultimately lost out to Steinway and some others. What they did is they adapted to the fact that they didn't compete as well. They entered a niche market, adopting new technologies, and they entered the player piano market. So you've probably seen them, the old pianos with the rolls and the scrolls. And they were very successful in doing that. They harnessed new technologies. They adapted to competitive pressure. They changed, they tried and experimented with new things, and they had some success in this market. They were successful with that up to a point, and that point was competition from new forms of entertainment that came, that Americans and others could access in the middle part of the 20th century. So home forms of musical entertainment that sort of pushed the player piano into an earlier era. So what were they to do with this? Well, they adapted again under this competitive pressure, seeing that this market was disappearing, and they entered a new business line of business where they created a product called the auto typist. This was based on existing technology of the player piano, and basically what it was is a combination of sort of a typewriter and a Xerox machine. It gave you, if you were an office manager, say you ran a law firm where you had to produce a lot of paper, you could type out a letter, and then you had this imprint in the same way that a piano scroll had this imprint, and then you could publish over and over and over again that same letter to send out to clients or whomever. So they entered an entirely new market, and they had enormous success with this for a while until in the second half of the 20th century, new forms of technology and innovation started to put pressure on the autotypist. Obviously, we had electric typewriters, we had actual Xerox machines, we had the personal computer revolution, and then the internet today. And the autotypist is now sitting in some industrial history museum somewhere. But even my father's generation, a couple of my uncles worked for the company up into the 70s. That's how long that this thing stuck around. So that brings me to my own career, which has been spent, as Brink indicated, a lot of time I've spent in web publishing. Now, these were jobs that literally did not exist 15 years ago, and yet I've been gainfully employed working with technology and in sectors that simply didn't exist. And yet these were the same forces that enabled me to have my career today were those that upset and destroyed my earlier ancestors' businesses and lines of work and livelihoods. That's a little bit about my family history. I tell you that because as I looked at that, when I looked at sort of standard economic descriptions, they were unable to capture this dynamic process of change over time, and they overlooked a number of different things. I mean, you have the standard economic model, which takes land, labor, and capital as factors of production, and then there's a discussion about how to allocate scarce resources, as Brink mentioned. But this overlooks so many factors, including things like entrepreneurship, competition, the entry and exit of firms, innovation and technical change, the knowledge base that grows over time that makes continuing technical change possible. And also the institutional mix of laws and norms and conventions that make dynamic economic change possible over time. All of this has been largely absent from a sustained discussion of economics up until very recently. And so as I looked at this family history, I said, well, how can I understand this better? But as it turns out, there has been a lot of work over the last 2 generations in economics that's trying to help answer some of that. It's trying to help explain this dynamic process over time. Arnold's going to talk a little bit more about some of what's in the book, but that explains my interest. Now, I'd like to turn to who would be interested in this book. As Brink said, there are a number of interviews with fairly prominent thinkers that will be known to many of the people in this room, folks like Robert Fogel or Paul Romer, and people like that. But there are also interviews with people that may not be as well known to you or whose work you may not be as familiar with. So I encourage you to spend some time with it. But I also think this is a book that should appeal to. It's not a partisan book. I used to joke that we probably could have had better book sales if we named it From Poverty to Prosperity and How Obama is Taking Us Back to Poverty Again, or something like that. But it's an explicitly nonpartisan book. It's an idea book, and it should appeal to honest people of any sort of ideological or political stripe. I actually think in some ways it is designed to be a conversation with liberals. Arnold once described himself in an essay a number of years ago as a bleeding heart libertarian, and I sort of think of myself in a similar manner. And so what we're presenting in the book should, I think, be appealing to liberals. Now, I know this is an issue of concern to Brink, who has been trying to engage in a dialogue between libertarians and liberals to see if there's common ground, and maybe progressives could be attracted to some of the arguments that libertarians make about markets and about why we should rely on markets more than state action, say.